Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks Fridays for Birds for inviting me to give this webinar. My name is Luca Guitink. I am a Junior Technical Officer for Wetlands International Europe, and today I will be talking about one of the most remarkable citizen science programs in the world, namely the International Waterbird Census. And I'll walk you through the International Waterbird Census as it reaches its 60th count, and how it connects with the African-Eurasian Waterbird Census Partnership as well. The goal today is to give both professionals and volunteers useful insights in how the IWC works, what it has achieved, and how you can be part of it. So before we get into it, I think it's important to highlight why we even count waterbirds. Well, waterbirds are highly visible, widespread across a wide variety of wetlands worldwide. And waterbirds are also a popular hunted species, which also attracts millions of hunters worldwide. And at the beginning of the 20th century, it was recognized that the only way to conserve and sustainably manage waterbirds was through international collaboration. And luckily, waterbirds also fascinate bird watchers and are relatively easy to count, which makes them a very attractive and cost-effective to count year after year with a largely volunteer network, which allows us to track population trends over time for a whole population nationally and at site levels. So the IWC was born out of this initiative. And the IWC also supports international policy instruments such as Ramsar, Iowa, the East Atlantic, East Asian, Australasian Flyway Partnership, the Red List, and more. So the IWC began in 1967, coordinated by one of the predecessors of Wetlands International, namely the International Waterfowl Research Bureau. It was inspired by earlier post-World War II counts of hunted bird species in the UK. And at that time, the aim was to understand international changes in important hunted species like geese, ducks, and coots, many of which have been shown alarming local declines as wetlands disappeared across the landscape. And what began as a Western Palearctic effort grew into one of the largest biodiversity datasets. So counts tend to occur in January, February, depending on the region, to capture peak winter congregations when these waterbirds gather in larger flocks in fewer sites. And today, the International Waterbird Census spans over 189 countries with nearly 2 billion individual birds counted. And the strength of the IWC lies in its continuity and standardized approach, producing valuable long-term data sets. The IWC has expanded globally through regional schemes. So in 1987, the Asian Waterbird Census, or AWC, began. In 1990, the Neotropical Waterbird Census, or NWC, joined. In 1991, the African Waterbird Census, or AFWC, joined. And more recently, sister schemes were initiated in the Caribbean and in 2011, also in Central America. And this expansion allows us to understand migratory patterns across the entire flyways and support large-scale conservation planning. So the census is regionally coordinated by Wetlands International for Africa, Eurasia, the Neotropics, and Asia. And Central America Census is coordinated by Manomet and by the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is coordinated by Birds Caribbean. And most countries participating in the IWC have a national coordinator who organizes the counts, fundraises, and collates data, and shares with the international program. Although some counters are professionals, government staff, or researchers, the vast majority of the counters are volunteers, making this one of the world's oldest and largest citizen science programs. The census follows a look-see method where counters survey wetlands and report the total number of all waterbird species present. As you can see, there are a wide variety of wetlands, from coastal wetlands to inland dams, and weather conditions from freezing snow to the tropics, which the counters have to deal with. The census is organized when many species congregate in large numbers in these wetland sites, and for many species, at the moment, the various populations are separated and distinct. With the count data collated by the countries, we can assess waterbird populations, sizes, and trends. Population size estimates are used to inform 1% thresholds, which are then used to identify wetlands of international importance. Population trends alert us to sudden declines that require conservation action. There are about 2,300 waterbird populations globally. Around 700 are assessed using IWC data. Some of the rest are assessed using breeding season data, like the EBCC's Pan-European Common Bird Monitoring Scheme, or breeding atlases. Others require specialist monitoring programs. For example, the Buick swan, which is monitored under the International Swan Census. The Swan Census is organized every 5 or 6 years, and the next one is in January 2026. It is at the same time as the IWC counts, but extends into agricultural areas in addition to wetlands. Another goal of the IWC is capacity building. Capacity building is essential for reliable monitoring. While on a global scale, the IWC monitoring has covered a vast number of wetlands, when you look at how often the same site has been counted, for example, more than 5 times, the coverage becomes far less complete, only remaining strong around Europe. This highlights the need for continuous capacity building and the expansion of strong networks that can continue the counts to allow for more consistent year-to-year monitoring. Training, equipment, and coordination help ensure data quality and coverage. Although the IWC is mostly volunteer-driven, international collaboration is required to support capacity building efforts and fundraise for lower-income countries where there are fewer counters and complex wetlands to count. In the African Eurasian Flyway, there are several regional capacity building initiatives helping to support many countries to undertake the counts, hold trainings, manage data, and use that data for conservation. These include the Vital Flyway Initiative in the East Atlantic, the Mediterranean Waterbird Network coordinated by Tour de Vala, and the Adriatic Flyway Initiative of Euronatur, and the Resource Project coordinated by the FAO. Currently, there is no international initiative covering the West Asian and East African flyway, although several countries in this flyway have received support through the Waterbird Fund. So, how is IWC data used? Well, IWC data is relevant for all levels of conservation, from local wetlands to global initiatives. It has been vital in guiding efforts to restore and manage species. IUCN Red List assessments for many waterbirds species are informed by the IWC data, and different bodies use the data as a basis for action plans, international single species action, and management plans under the African Eurasian Waterbird Agreement, or IWA. Since 2005, IWC data has also contributed to global research on the highly pathogenic avian influenza, working with the FAO, the CMS, the WHO, and others. Monitoring through the IWC also provides a feedback mechanism, detecting issues and then guiding solutions. This shows how the IWC supports waterbird conservation across the full cycle of adaptive management. Here are a few of the outcomes that demonstrate the value of the IWC. The first benefit that can easily be overlooked, is the social aspect. On our IWC postcard website, you can find stories from IWC counters around the world. Many of them describe the importance of meeting up with friends, sharing time outside in nature, and feeling part of a community that is working to save their local wetlands and waterbirds. The collective nature of the IWC has inspired communities into action around the world. In Antigua and Barbuda, the Environmental Awareness Group used Caribbean Waterbird Census training to launch Birding for Beginners, online sessions during the 2020 COVID lockdown. These sessions sparked the creation of Antigua's first birding club, the Vital Warblers, who now join the Caribbean Waterbird Census surveys at key wetlands. They also helped install shorebird-themed signs to reduce illegal dumping. And in 2025, the Environmental Awareness Group trained even more observers, equipping them to collect vital data and strengthen conservation across the islands. Next, the IWC is a valuable tool to identify and conserve wetlands in important sites for waterbirds. The IWC has helped designate 956 Ramsar sites, covering 1.5 million square kilometers, the size of Mongolia. And there are many more waiting to be designated. This paper, led by the Mediterranean Waterbird Network, coordinated by Tour de Valais, used IWC data to identify more than 150 sites that would qualify as Ramsar sites. The IWC data also lets us look at how well waterbirds are doing in sites. In Ghana, there are several Ramsar sites along the coast. Analysis by Ya and colleagues for the East Atlantic Flyway Assessment in 2023 show increasing numbers of black heron, which is a local resident population and one that is considered sacred by some local communities. Meanwhile, the numbers of waders has declined, including populations of pied avocet, which used to winter in internationally significant numbers at the site. The flyway population trend for the pied avocet is stable, which could suggest that individuals are staying further north as changing climate makes wetlands closer to their breeding sites more suitable for overwintering. In the UK, the national IWC counts, called the Wetland Bird Survey, or WEBS, is used to alert potential problems at site. This is an old example from the Wash, a large estuary system and one of the most important wetlands for waterbirds in the country and flyway. Compared with the Ryder region, the Wash has a visible decline in oyster catcher, a finding supported by further research with ringing data from the Wash Wader Research Group. The decline was found to be linked to a drop in the mussel stock. Oyster catcher WEBS counts are now used for local shellfishing consents, and there are no current alerts triggered on the Wash. Sometimes the IWC alerts us to problems at the level of an entire population. In the early 2000s, IWC counts alerted us to a sudden decline in Weijin populations after a long period of steady increase. Follow-up research found that the cause was linked to problems at the breeding grounds, including low productivity of essential shoreline vegetation. Identifying these causes has led to targeted management actions, with an adaptive harvest management plan now in development for the species in the EU. Thanks to these efforts, the species seems to have recovered to 2000 levels. The IWC has also been used in some innovative research to show how effective management and policy decisions can be. In this paper published in Nature, the authors demonstrated that protected areas have a mixed impact on waterbirds, with a strong signal that areas managed for waterbirds or their habitat are more likely to benefit populations, and a weak signal that larger areas are more beneficial than smaller ones. That means just protecting areas is not enough. We need clear management goals, specifically targeted for waterbirds and wetlands, and also that bigger landscape approach is more effective for conservation. And this study from the same group found that the strongest predictor of changes in waterbird abundance and of conservation efforts having beneficial effects is the effective governance of a country. In areas in which governance is on average less effective, such as Western and Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South America, waterbird declines are particularly pronounced. A higher protected area coverage of wetland environments facilitates waterbirds' increase, but only in countries with more effective governance. We can see the impacts of stable governance and good policy by calculating indicators, which is grouping species by shared characteristics and comparing their combined trends. Here, we used IWC data to compare the trends of species listed on Annex 1 of the EU Birds Directive, so protected species, and species listed on Annex 2, or huntable species. Since the directive was introduced in 1980, Annex 1 species have a much more favorable status, proving the effectiveness of the site protection mechanism of the EU Birds Directive. Now coming to the African Eurasian Waterbird Census Partnership. The IWC partnership strengthens monitoring across the African Eurasian flyway. It helps to standardize methods, build capacity, and ensure consistent data collection across the flyway. It also supports Iowa implementation by providing the scientific basis for the decision-making. Some of the major African Eurasian Waterbird Census outputs include the waterbird population trends and estimates, the triennial conservation status report, of which the CSR9 was just launched, and the critical site network tool. The African Eurasian Waterbird Partnership supports national coordinators within the African Eurasian region with training, capacity building, and harmonization. It ensures data flow, improves regional coverage, and helps countries engage in African Eurasian Waterbird Agreement processes. While every country varies slightly in the format of data submissions, there are general guidelines to be followed when conducting the counts. For example, a site is defined as a wetland area chosen for monitoring. The counting unit or subsite is the area one counter can cover in approximately 2 to 4 hours, and the timing is usually in January for the most effective non-breeding counts, as many species congregate during this month. To avoid double counting as much as possible, the counts are done as simultaneously to each other as possible. In addition, methodology includes using fixed vantage points or routes, avoiding double counting by following the site boundaries, recording all species and numbers, and also recording pressures such as disturbances, threats, habitat changes, and the conservation actions or site status of a particular site. Every country records in their own way, for example, using online apps such as eBird, Ornitho, or Varnaming. Sometimes they use Excel file sheets, and sometimes, very traditionally, they use paper. In this manual, written by the Flyway, the Wadensee Flyway initiative, you can find more details on counting protocols and what to watch out for while conducting the counts. Counting at different sites can also be challenging depending on the conditions of the site. For example, in Rufiji, Tanzania, Rufiji, Tanzania is an example of a logistically challenging site to conduct counts. Counting here is dictated by the tidal cycle. At high tide, many birds are deep inside the mangroves, where observers cannot see them. At low tide, the mudflats become so extensive and soft that walking is impossible and boats cannot access many creeks. Instead, counts must be timed precisely with the rising tide, just as the birds begin concentrating, sometimes only for a very short window. On the other side of the scale, other sites are relatively straightforward to count. For example, Huntly Dams in Zambia have clearly delineated coordinates where the counts need to be done. It is one enclosed wetland which is easily accessible by foot. There are stable water levels, and birds concentrate in predictable zones. The full count can be done in approximately 2 hours. National coordinators are also central to the IWC. They maintain site inventories, train observers, validate data, and ensure synchronized national counts. They also provide feedback to observers and compile national reports, which are used in the international syntheses. The coordination ensures the integrity and continuity of the national data set. So here you can see how the flow of the information that occurs throughout the counts. Joining the counts is fairly simple. Visit the IWC coordinators page, linked here, and also available through this QR code. And by clicking on your country's IWC national coordinator's name, an email to them will open directly. No advanced skills are required, just an interest and a willingness to learn. New participants are often paired with experienced teams and learn in the field how the counts are done, and it is always encouraged to join even if you have no experience. Supporting the IWC can be done in a variety of ways, and here are some of the important organizations who are fundamental to the continued success of the IWC. Additionally, the Waterbird Fund provides essential financial support to under-resourced regions, so please consider donating. Every little bit counts. Also available through the QR code. Finally, if you are interested to learn more about this Global Citizen Science program, you can read more details in our recently launched brochure. The brochure summarizes 6 decades of IWC, including major findings and global expansion. Thank you for your attention, and do you have any questions?